favourite part of playing her is when she gets to really dress up, because that's what's propelling her through the story. The end game is to get this Christian Dior dress.
Hello, Focus Fashion fans, and welcome to Dressed, a series that celebrates the costumes of Focus Features films. Today, we are taking a trip to the House of Dior as we check out some of the beautiful replica gowns of Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris.
Academy Award nominee Leslie Manville plays a lovable Ada Harris in this delightful and enchanting tale. Mrs. Harris is a seemingly ordinary British housekeeper, but her dream to own a couture Christian Dior gown takes her on an extraordinary adventure to Paris, where she manages to make new friends and inspire change with her bright and vibrant zest for life.
The film features a 1950s European-inspired wardrobe, but of course, nothing outshines the Dior replicas that grace the screen. And we're so lucky to have some of the dresses with us here today. Let's go take a look.
Isn't it divine? £500.
500 quid for a dress?
I love seeing these dresses up close. This is a replica of a dress from 1957. This is exactly what was so signature of the Dior look. And probably about 10 years before Mrs. Harris, a new designer named Christian Dior launched onto Paris as a reaction to post-World War II, and it was all about the new look. And this has a lot of the signature details of the new look. The smaller waist, the fit and flare, and of course in certain things that would give you more accentuated shoulders. These were the ideals that defined Christian Dior and made him become such a household name. Jenny Bevan did an incredible job in creating this replica gown from Dior, working with the archives. This is white organza with black velvet, and of course the ribbon detail, every single pucker, every single pointelle stitch right here, you can see was so signature of what Christian Dior was doing back then. And of course, we have a second dress from that same fashion show that you saw in the movie happening in the Dior salon. And again, it's a very beautiful replica of what Dior was doing back in the 50s. And you see this as sort of the signature double Dutch satin, which is thicker and heavier and slightly different from the new look with the small waist and the fit and flare. But you do have this sort of 3/4 mid-calf length, which is very signature for him back then. The wrap and the gather and the twist here in the bustier detail. It's a sweetheart neckline, which was very signature for him and for couture back in the 50s. Well, I'd love to learn more about working with a legendary House of Dior. Why don't we dial up the costume designer for this film, Academy Award winner Jenny Bevan.
Excuse me, chère madame, but it would be my honor to have you view the collection as my guest.
Jenny, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, and all the way from Australia. I really appreciate this.
And nice to be here.
Now, everyone's going to be very jealous of this, Jenny, but you had a chance to go through the archives at the House of Dior. Now, how would you describe Christian Dior's impact on fashion and haute couture, especially in the 1950s?
When I was first asked to do this project, which obviously is a totally charming story, I was told that Dior would be doing the Dior part of it and that I would simply be doing the rest. I went to Dior, to the archives, to learn what I could about 1950 collection. And they were incredibly helpful. They still have the books which show exactly the drawing, the fabric samples, the notes, just amazing. And it was at that point I did realise that they were not going to be able to help us actually make the gowns and that would be up to me. Luckily, I do know people who are very clever cutters and understand about fashion and particularly about Dior. And I knew we would be in good hands.
So at the beginning of the film, Mrs. Harris is definitely not wearing a Dior gown. How would you describe that particular aesthetic at the top of the film?
Women didn't have many clothes in that time. And I felt that she just had to keep a real reality about, but it didn't have to be drab. Even though she's a cleaner and she lives in a basement flat, she's still a sort of joyous, hopeful person. And the florals, they were mainly real costume. I mean, we didn't make them. Those are vintage pieces.
Now, how did you approach choosing and creating the dresses that would end up being part of the fashion show inside the House of Dior?
Mrs. Harris obviously loved colour, and something pretty and attractive. So we looked at his existing 1957 show, which is what we're supposed to be recreating, and basically chose a sample of dresses from that. And then on top of that, we made the two dresses that the one she wants and can't have, and the one she gets, and so those were made because they had specific story points.
What do you think it is about that magical red dress temptation that captures Mrs. Harris's eye?
I saw a beautiful red dress in the archives. It had hand sewn on sequins over the whole of the fabric, which was glorious. And I thought, well, that's the way to go. And it also had a certain simplicity that I thought would suit Leslie. I thought that Mrs. Harris would recognize it as something she could wear.
Jenny, I have to say, it has been an incredible joy speaking with you today. You are a trove of information and inspiration, and I love what you've done for this particular film. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through your process.
This has been really fun. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna buy a dress, a Christian Dior from Paris.
Wow. It's so great to see these dresses up close and in real life, and these amazing Dior replicas, because they scream so much about what the signature of Christian Dior was doing, especially during that particular period. Look at this blue dress. I mean, the portrait neckline here, the small waist, the fabric-covered buttons, the fit and flare, and this sort of heavy silk gazar. All of these were details and signatures of Christian Dior's new look. He started that back in 1947, but it exploded into the 50s as a real reaction to women being more feminine, more dressed up, more elegant post-World War II. And I love this in sort of that baby blue periwinkle. This was a big color back then because, again, as a reaction to coming out of the war, women were wearing more colors, were wearing more lighter colors, a lot more pastels, a lot more Easter colors. And again, this is something that really just felt like a breath of fresh air. So let's talk about the wedding dress, and I'll give you a little tidbit here. Every single couture show back then, and even some today, still have the designers end their show with the wedding dress. This really was always about the finale, the piece de resistance. This is what the designer wanted to say, that here comes my bride, and you always knew that that's how the show ended. This is a very Dior-esque dress with the small waist, the ribbon detail here, the heavy Duchess satin, and again, the asymmetricalness and the portrait neckline here. All of those things contributed to what made Mr. Dior such an influential figure in the world of fashion. The tulle veil is secured by a very, very simple, delicate silk headband and silk that matches the gown. But let's talk about temptation. This is the gown that Mrs. Harris fell in love with, and I can see why. If you look closely, you can see such intricate detail, and that really was the hallmark of what couture dresses were about, even up to today. You can see right now on top of the silk satin, you have beautifully sequined, delicate flowers and details, and that every single petal has a different shimmer on it. And all of this applique would have been hand applied and hand sewn by hundreds of seamstresses and taking hundreds of hours to get this done. And you see this again in this sort of very signature Dior neckline, the small waist, the fit and flare, all those things that define new look. But this is what couture is about. In the film, Mrs. Harris wanted to pay 500 quid for her Dior couture dress. Well, I can tell you that today, that same dress would probably be about $500,000. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Dressed. And I hope you enjoyed these dresses as much as I did from Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris. I will see you next time.